Good morning to those joining. We're just waiting for some more people to trickle in, and we'll be aiming to start it a couple of minutes past, probably about 3 minutes past. So bear with us. Right, we're starting to see numbers go up. So I think I'll start introducing so that we can get going in good time. So welcome everybody to the Southwest Marine Ecosystem Fisheries webinar for 2024, which is our look back to see whether fisheries, it was a normal year for fisheries in the Southwest in 2023. So a little bit of housekeeping. If you can pop any questions that you've got in the Q&A, not the chat, then we have got time after every speaker to go through a few questions. We've got about 5 minutes after every speaker, and we should have about 15 minutes at the end, depending on my timekeeping, to kind of have a bit of a wash up and ask any kind of more overarching questions. I think it's always quite a difficult question in fisheries to ask whether it was a normal year, because they are subject to so much variation, ecological, economic, and kind of also market variations, and obviously subject to management. So all of those things can change fisheries from year to year. So I'm probably biased, but I think fisheries within Southwest Marine Ecosystems is probably one of the hardest things to say, was it a normal year, and understand if it was or wasn't, why is that? Because there's so many different conflicting things that can shape a fishery. But I think with the range of speakers we've got today, we can have a really good stab at understanding that for the Southwest. So really excited by the panel. I think it's pretty much the same as last year. I think Jeroen maybe couldn't make it last year. I can't remember whether you managed to make the webinar, Jeroen, but no, you had a tricky year for Peltic surveys last year, I think. So this year, really happy to have Jeroen back, and to welcome all of our other brilliant panelists back as well. So we're going to sort of kick off the meeting today with a talk on the forage fish in the Southwest Marine Ecosystems, and then go on to Matt's talk on the Cornwall Good Seafood Guide, which gives a really good feel for how stocks and management are doing and what that kind of means for consumer choices in the Southwest, really. And then we're going to move on to Jacob, who's going to do the another version of the talk that he gave last year, which was absolutely brilliant, and kind of give us a feel for what the fisheries data from the MMO is showing. And really excited that Emily's here to talk to us about bluefin tuna. So thanks, Emily, for really persevering to make sure that happened today. And then I'm going to wrap up with a talk on kind of national policy updates and what that means for the Southwest, before we kind of just move into a bit of a general kind of chat and think about Southwest Marine Ecosystems and Fisheries for 2023 in this 2024 webinar. So without further ado, we have got lots of people joined now, and I'm going to hand over to Jeroen, who's going to share his screen and kick off the webinar for this year. Thanks, Jeroen.
Thank you very much, Libby, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to present at this great this forum. I take it you can see my screen?
Yes, thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Great, lovely. Right, so yes, Peltic. So it's a pelagic ecosystem survey of the Celtic Sea and Western Channel, and I'll just present some of the results from the 2023 survey. I'll be presenting it, but I don't want to proceed without at least acknowledging my co-authors who are on this slide, most of whom are from Cefas, apart from Peter Howlett, who's from Marine Life, with whom we work closely together on this survey. So, for those not familiar, Peltic is an ecosystem survey. It started in 2012, and it's an autumn survey. It's probably worth reiterating that. So the 2023 survey took place between the 28th of September and the 31st of October. But for its throughout its time series, most of the surveys have been taking place in the middle of October, basically. So it's pretty consistent from that perspective. And the primary aim is to map and quantify the small pelagic fish community in the southwest. But because we are very conscious that the small pelagic fish play a key role in the sort of food web of the southwest, we try and monitor as much of the surrounding ecosystem as well. In any case, the data feed into two stock assessments at the moment. So it's spread in the English Channel and sardine since 2020, I should say. It's only a fairly recent addition. We feed into the sardine stock assessment as well, the wider sardine stock. Here is a map of the survey area. So the black lines are the transects along which we run the acoustic data collection during the day. So it's an acoustic survey, so we collect high resolution information wherever we steam. We follow those transects. And as we run the acoustics, we also record information by using the observers to record information on the top predators in the area. So this is birds, mammals, and bluefin tuna. We record subsurface oceanography as well using our ferry book system. And every once in a while, we conduct a pelagic trawl, collecting biological information from the small pelagic fish, and also we use that to validate our acoustic data. So at night, we go back to the same area, and at those yellow or red points, we deploy a number of other instruments like our plankton sampling, which we do to collect information about spawning activity, particularly of sardine. And we have a finer mesh plankton sampler, which records information on the prey, the zooplanktonic prey of the small pelagic fish. At a subset of those in yellow, we deploy a full resolution rosette and CTD and collect water for a bunch of different variables, and more recently also eDNA. One of the things to point out is that we started in a small area. So this is the UK part of the waters around Cornwall. That was for the first few years. And then we realized that, of course, some of the species that we were interested in didn't conform to the national boundaries. They were found also in the French waters. So we expanded the coverage to include those waters as well. Had a one-off venture into the Eastern Channel, but didn't find a huge amount there. And also, of course, the extra costs were probably not worth it. So we've since then focused primarily on these waters in this square here. The last few years, the Welsh government has funded us to sample also further north in Cardigan Bay. As Libby already mentioned, we had a bit of a disaster in 2022. We had major technical problems with the vessel, so we only managed to cover this very small area. I'll point that out in the presentation as I go along. Okay, before I talk about the actual fish, I wanted to briefly highlight some of the oceanographic results. So these are some of the typical products we produce at the end of the survey. So these are data collected during the survey, so a bit of a snapshot if you like. And on the left, you see the sea surface temperatures. The general patterns are fairly similar to what we see most years. So we get this cold water pool here at the mouth of the channel. We get sort of slightly warmer water further offshore. But the temperatures were noticeably a little bit warmer than what we normally encounter. It's 15 to even 17 degrees. The middle plot is perhaps an interesting one because it shows the presence of the various frontal systems. So this is the delta T, which is in other words the difference between the surface temperature and the bottom temperature. Where that is zero in the purple areas, that those waters are well mixed, and where there is stratification of some sort, half a degree or more, which is the area in green and yellow, it's called stratified waters. And where those two water bodies meet is effectively a frontal system. So this is fairly typical. We get the Celtic Sea front up here, and then the ocean front feature here. And I want you to sort of try and remember roughly where these areas are. On the right is a surface salinity map. I won't spend too much time on it. It's never that informative. It's fairly typical in the sense that we get this River Severn influence here, which sort of reduces the salinity in this part here. We've got slightly lower salinity also in Cardigan Bay and in Lime Bay, but otherwise pretty normal. I think this is an anomaly here. Right. So I mentioned the temperature being a little bit warm to our, our feeling was that it was a warmer year, but obviously there are ways in which to test it. So this year, for the first time, we produced a new output. on the left, you see the long-term average mean surface temperatures for the collected during the Peltic survey. So this is from 2012 to 2021. We've left the 2022 survey out because of the mentioned issues. And if we then, and as you can see, the temperatures are sort of 13.5, 14.5, 15.5 degrees, which are, of course, a lot lower than what I just showed you earlier. So if we subtract the surface temperatures from the 2023 survey from this long-term average, you see this anomaly map on the right. And as you can see, the areas in red are those that are warmer than the long-term average, and those in blue that are cooler than the long-term average. And as you can see, there's only very small areas where the waters were actually cooler than the long-term average, with most areas, particularly on the west, warmer by at least 2 degrees. So basically a warmer year. Good, so let's look at the fish now. Spread, one of our key species here. So I mentioned the echo sounder and the acoustic data. For those not familiar, this is a visual representation of that. So this is an echogram. You could sort of imagine it to be a vertical slice through the water column. Seabed is down here. Oh, sorry. Seabed is down here. The sea surface is up there. And these big red blobs are a series of spread schools, several miles long here. So this is a real high density of spread. Now, if you plot those horizontally on the map, you get something like this figure on the right. So the bubbles are representative for the acoustic density, in other words, abundance of spread in the area. And this is fairly typical. So we get high densities of spread in Lyme Bay here. In some years, we get them also in what we call the Eddystone Bay, I suppose, which we did this year. Typically, we find them also north of the Cornish Peninsula and high numbers also in Cardigan Bay. Now that manifests itself also in pretty good biomass. So this area delineated by this box on the right is the area that's important for the stock assessment, and the biomass within that area is plotted on the left-hand side here. So these are the years. These are the biomass values in tons. And yeah, typical sort of small pelagic fish, high, low years sort of fluctuate a little bit. And if you look at since 2017 onwards, the sort of biomass has been pretty stable at sort of 35,000 tons, with that one 2021 exception, I suppose, where we had this really high biomass value. But if you compare this to this long-term sort of average, this year's observation of 60,000 tons was a lot higher, nearly double that of the sort of long-term average. So really, really good news. The population looks to be, in that sense, in good health. So we got loads of juvenile fish coming through. So these are numbers by age on the x-axis. And what this shows is that we get loads of O groups. So these are fish recruited in the year of the survey coming through. So that's good news for the population because it means there's lots of recruitment. It is unfortunately not quite as good for the fishery because the fishery is particularly interested in the bigger fish. The bigger fish are more marketable for human consumption. And so the fisheries really struggled with these smaller fish. Okay. Right, off to the second species, one of our more warmer water species, I suppose, sardine. This is an echogram of sardine, and I want you to focus not on this school here, which is actually an anchovy school, but if you look closely down, just above the seabed, is a big layer, if you like, of very dense sardine. Now, this is quite unusual. We don't normally see this, but it happened to be in an area where there were lots of bluefin tuna and common dolphin. So this could be some sort of behavioral response, anti-predation response. Again, here's the typical density distribution map, in this case of sardine, widely distributed again, including all the way up in Cardigan Bay, which is not something we've seen for the last couple of years. Highest density is probably found in these more western waters. On the left here is a map of the sardine eggs that we found from our plankton sampling. And if you squint your eye, you see that the highest densities are again fairly much in agreement with what we found in the acoustic. So off Lansdowne and south of the Lizard are the highest densities, which matches the acoustic backscatter. So these are fish sexually mature, producing the eggs. So which is good news because we want those recruits to come in and sustain future populations. And again, here's the population structure. So sardine gets a little bit, we find slightly older sardine than some of the other species. Huge amounts of O groups coming through again. So there's been a series of recruits coming through the population, which is really good news. Now that's also reflected by the biomass, which is the highest it's ever been. So just to explain, these are two biomass trends. The red line is representative for the area captured by those two red strata. So this is the long core area that we've sampled from the beginning of the survey area. But in blue is the area that we think is much more important because it captures the stock better, which we started to sample from 2017 onwards. And you can see there's typical fluctuations with 2023 exceptionally high year at nearly 500,000 tons. Just pointing out that the 22 data are interpolated here based on that those issues already mentioned. All right, last but certainly not least, a proper warm water species, anchovy. Really interesting species. We started in the last few years seeing pure anchovy schools, which is something we never saw in the early years when they were always mixed in with the other small pelagic fish species. So these are a series of schools, some of these 20 meters tall, went on for miles and miles. Really, certainly by our perception on the surface, that we saw loads of anchovy. We also started to see these really strange features. So slightly noisy echogram. You have to apologize, my apologies for that. But at the top here, if you look carefully, you see these big, much denser schools right below the sea surface. And that's something I'll talk a bit about shortly. So again, really briefly, on the right, the distribution map of anchovy, again, widespread, not as far north as the other two species, but certainly widespread through the rest of the survey area. Probably not as far west as Sardine, and with most of the densities in the Eddystone Bay area. Again, biomass very, very high, 250,000 tons. So if we ignore that 2022 data point, for which we obviously didn't have very good data because of the issues reported, the last biomass we estimated reliably was in 2021, where it was just below 50,000 tons. We now have nearly 5 times that. It's unbelievable, really high. And again, largely driven by the O group, so the young of the year coming through, with the age ones also contributing significantly. Now, why are we seeing such huge amounts of anchovy? If you permit me to go and give you a little bit of anchovy history, I hope to explain what we think is happening. So basically, for the most part of the 20th century, from the 1930s to late 1990s, the northernmost anchovy spawning area was this green area here in the southern Bay of Biscay. So that's where the anchovy were. They spawned, they found in the Bay of Biscay, and that's where they were caught. But then in the 90s, some people may remember there started to be increasing reports of anchovy further north. So they were found in the North Sea by fisheries independent surveys. Some of the fisheries along the south coast of Cornwall started to pick up the occasional anchovy opportunistically as well. So a study in 2012 published by Pierre Petiga and a load of other co-authors found that these northern anchovy were not actually Bay of Biscay fish, but were in fact there were remnants of northern populations which had somehow survived through quite poor conditions and suddenly were doing better, probably because of warming. There's a lot more details in that paper, but what they found is that the anchovy from the Bay of Biscay could not have made it north because the spring spawned fish, as they drifted further north in the autumn, would be pushed back southwards because of the prevailing current in the autumn. All right. So we had suddenly two populations, the northern population and one in the Bay of Biscay. And it was found that the fish in the anchovy in the channel were actually those northern population that went there to overwinter. So Peltic survey has been capturing the biomass of that northern population quite neatly in the autumn because they were all overwintering, or we believe they were. Now, in the last few years, those surface schools have been appearing in this southwest corner of the English Channel. And this is a new thing. We've now got genetic evidence that these are, in fact, Bay of Biscay fish. So suddenly we have a new scenario where the two populations mix. And the reason why we now believe this is possible, because the population size of the Biscay stock has increased, with spawning taking place further north, which now permits some of those fish to drift into the channel. So a new scenario altogether, with two stocks mixing in the English Channel, which is part of the reason why we see so much fish. Okay, right, last couple of slides. Top predators, I would normally switch straight to the bluefin tuna, but I wouldn't want to do so without at least mentioning the Cory shearwaters, which was the first time in more than 10 years that we've seen them at this time of year in the survey, huge amounts. In fact, all shearwater species were highly dominant and were overtaking some of the more commonly seen species like skuas, which were badly suffering from bird flu. Anyway, bluefin tuna, a map on the right there of our observations. So again, widely distributed, some of the highest numbers more on the north of the Cornish Peninsula this year. And we collect this data as part of a time series that was published by Tom Horton a couple of years ago, which shows that these data may be useful as some sort of biomass trend of the population in UK waters in the autumn. Okay, so to conclude, after a disastrous 2022, because of technical issues, we had a successful 2023 Baltic survey. It was a particularly warm year, which of course the media picked up on anyway, but we found the same to be true in the autumn when we were there. Spread was in very good numbers, despite the fact that it's a relatively slightly cooler water species, but we find in good numbers, although largely the smaller fish, I should say, my apologies. And both of the warm water species, sardine and anchovy, saw their best years yet. Sardine found in 500,000 tons, which is the highest of the time series, further north, including evidence of spawning further north than normal. Anchovy also found very high numbers, and we think now that's probably due to both stocks meeting, if you like, in the channel. And that's it. Thank you very much to the partners, Marine Life, and there's some contact details and Twitter accounts there for those that are interested. Thank you very much.
Absolutely fascinating. Thanks, Jeroen. I think we really missed your talk last year, but that has more than made up for it. So many questions, so many extra work. I still think the Peltic survey is such an amazing example of kind of that really holistic approach to kind of fisheries independent surveys that we don't see very often. So thank you so much. I think Martin was going to come in and field any questions from the Q&A.
Yeah, Jeroen, you want to stop sharing your screen?
I will do, yeah. Thank you.
We only had one question about someone who couldn't see the slides turning over, but I think that was fine. There wasn't any other comments. So if anyone's got any questions, do you want to just stick them in the Q&A, or otherwise we can obviously take them later or move on.
I think one's appeared.
Yeah, we do.
I'm going to chair's prerogative. I'm going to ask a question. Jeroen, it looked like there were kind of subtle differences in kind of the real hotspots for the different forage fish species, and also really interesting watching or seeing like where they were in the water column. Do you feel like they do have kind of their different niches? Is that changing? And do you see them, do they compete very directly? Do you see that changing with climate change? Just interesting in that niche separation.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Libby, and one that I can't answer sort of clearly, in the sense that I suppose the time series is still relatively short, which I suppose answers one of the questions in the Q&A. We started this in 2013, so we have 10 years of data now, and for particularly a short-lived species like spread, sardine, and anchovy, which fluctuate potentially highly from year to year, it's difficult to disentangle any long-term trends from any sort of more sporadic variability, isn't it? So having said that, we are seeing significant changes. So both anchovy and sardine have clearly increased, anchovy being the more, the strongest example. It's really difficult. We do see the same distribution for spread, for example. Sardine seems to be moving further north, and now the anchovy expansion is going to potentially put more pressure on some of the other more traditionally present species, like, well, herring we already know. I didn't even mention herring because we find barely any herring at this time of the year anyway. But certainly some of the local herring stocks that are being monitored by the Irish are not doing particularly well. So it's attractive to think that a cold water species like herring is suffering to the benefit of a warm water species like anchovy. We had a couple of papers published recently which looked at the diet of the different species, and there are subtle differences between the planktonic prey that these species feed on. So it's not going to be a direct competition necessarily in all cases. Some of the more opportunistic fish will be able to adapt more easily to changes in the zooplankton community. But these are the sort of rambles that I have no scientific evidence to yet back up at this point in time. But we're hoping to do that. We've got a few ongoing studies looking at these sort of events because yeah, it is a highly complex system, as you already indicated in your introduction. And of course, the other thing to remember is that what we're seeing in October is a snapshot. And if there's any changes in the timing, for example, of our survey, or indeed the timing of, say, the autumn bloom, our perception may be slightly influenced by that as well, because we may be slightly further along that process than another year. So it's really complex to disentangle the temporal from the spatial components. But yeah, by collecting more data, we get a better idea and a better opportunity of doing that.
Brilliant.
We've
Thank you.
got one more question, I think, and then we can move on, Libby.
Yes, thanks.
Robin Bradley, I think you kind of sort of answered this. Are there any peltic surveys in the spring, e.g. for sea bass eggs or larvae?
So the short answer is no. Although I have to say we did a one-off small peltic survey in Cardigan Bay in 2023 last year as well. So this was because we couldn't do the Cardigan Bay element in 2022 because of the technical issue. So we did a one-off March survey in Cardigan Bay, but only Cardigan Bay. So we have fish larvae from that area. Sea bass, I don't recall any being picked up at that time, although there were loads of other interesting species that we did pick up. But yeah, no, unfortunately we don't. And I wish we could, but yeah, it's it's not to be at this point in time, at least.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And yeah, really, really fascinating and a great kickoff for this this session. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Matt, who's going to update us on the Cornwall Good Seafood Guide and all the work he's been doing this year on that. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Libby. Right, I'm just getting my presentation. Hopefully everyone can see that. So there we go. Everyone see that?
Yes, thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me along again to give an update on our work. So I'm Matt Slater, and I'm one of the marine conservation officers at Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and I've been working on various projects. So you'll probably hear me talking about sea search and shore search, but also very close to my heart is the Cornwall Good Seafood Guide. So I'm quickly going to introduce it to anyone who didn't hear this last year. Sorry to those who did, so it's going to be a little bit of a repeat, but I wanted to set the scene and tell you what the project is. So the aims of Cornwall Good Seafood Guide, we decided to set up this project it's in its 9th year now, and the aim of the project was to bring together all available information on seafood sustainability in Cornwall in a format that's easy for consumers and for businesses to understand. We believe strongly that we need to be working with the fishing industry, and that a healthy sea is essential not just for wildlife but also for our fisheries. And with that in mind, we try to work using all of our local contacts and bring together the best available information we can. And when the project started, we looked at various different ways and thought long and hard about how to judge sustainability, because it isn't easy, as you all know. And rather than coming up with our own methodology, we actually ended up deciding to ask the Marine Conservation Society if we could work with them and look in a lot more detail than they were at that time doing for Cornish fisheries. And that's been how we've worked the project and how we score fisheries. So we produce we display all of our ratings on our website, which if you haven't seen, please go and have a look at. It's nice and user-friendly and focuses very much on highlighting the good things, the things that we know are sustainable. You can easily download a PDF just straight from the homepage with a click of a button and get given good advice on what seafood to go for. It works on your phone as well, but don't give it to a crab. And here's how we judge sustainability. So to rate seafood, as I said, we use the Marine Conservation Society's wild capture ratings methodology, and it looks at 3 main things. So we look at stock. This is i.e. the population of the species and how heavily fished as well. So both biomass and fishing pressure are looked at, and we're particularly looking at how those are affecting or how close they are to maximum sustainable yield. And to get that information, we look at published scientific sources. So one of our main sources of information is ICES, also Cefas. So yeah, Peltic survey comes into this, and information from Cornwall IFCA and academic studies done by universities. All published information can be used when we're assessing stock or species status. Then, very importantly, we look at how well managed is that fishery, and there's looking at a whole range of different management options. We would then score the effectiveness of the management, and then finally we'd look at the capture methods being used and the ecological effects of those capture methods, and all of these are combined to provide a score a rating out of 5, with 1 being the best and 5 being the worst. Now, in Cornwall, with Cornwall Good Seafood Guide, at an early stage, we decided that we wanted to sort of simplify the message a little and have a recommended symbol that could be used on fishmongers' counters, on menus, etc. So we're currently saying that seafood rated 1, 2, or 3 can be labelled as recommended by supporters of the Cornwall Good Seafood Guide project. So there's our recommended symbol, and you're seeing that more and more all around the county and further afield, highlighting good options on menus. Obviously within that, however, to caveat that, a 1 is still better than a 3. However, we wanted to sort of clearly make it easy for consumers to use. And if you click on a fish on our website, you get a whole load of information. At the top, you get seasonality, so when it's being caught and when it's good to eat it. And then we have a very brief sustainability overview, and that is really designed for a chef or a consumer to quickly get the gist of things and learn about roughly how sustainable this thing is. Then as you scroll down the page, we have then ratings for each for that species for each capture method. And going further down the page, we also have all of that information I mentioned earlier. So we have detailed write-ups on stock management and capture methods. And here you have the example from mackerel. And then more features of the website. We also have lots of history of the fishing industry, information about the fishing industry today, information about fishing methods, and a shop where you can buy t-shirts. And we also have a business supporters section. So we work with lots of fishers all around the county, and I've got a colleague now in post, Oscar Miller, who's our marine business advisor, who is working with fishermen in the Mevagissey area at present and the Fowl estuary. And yeah, we really want to use our website to highlight best practice and to improve engagement, and we want to work with fishermen as much as possible. So if any of you have contacts who you think would be suitable, please put them in touch with us. And we have lots of supporters of the project now all around the county. Lots of restaurants, fish sellers, fishmongers, hotels have signed up to be supporters of Cornwall Good Seafood Guide. They make a small financial contribution that helps us run the project. And in return, they can then use our logos and they feature on our website. Something that we've been running this supporter scheme now for 8 years. And this year, we're actually bringing out a new amendment to the scheme, whereby businesses who go that extra step for their sustainability be recognised with a new gold standard to help them stand out. And to achieve this, they're going to be serving recommended seafood wherever possible, reducing 4s and not serving 5s. And we feel this is a really good positive first step, and we really hope we see lots of businesses engaging with this. It's quite a challenging time with the current economic climate, so it's going to be a tricky one. We're going to have lots of conversations with businesses, but we really hope we can move that one forwards. So what are good seafood choices? What are the best? These were the same last year, actually. Farmed shellfish, mussels and oysters come out very well. Seaweeds, and then line caught mackerel, net caught hake and monkfish all coming out very well. We have quite a problem still in the southwest, that we have lots of species that are data poor. Some of them very commercially important, with the asterisks there highlighting. You know, cuttlefish, for example, is now one of the most important catch in the southwest of England, but we have very poor data and virtually no management. Something that's probably going to be discussed later. So yeah, we've got quite a challenge. So what has changed on the Seafood Guide, Cornwall Good Seafood Guide, since I spoke to you last? So last winter, we review our ratings, by the way, every 6 months. So half of the species are reviewed in the winter and half of them are reviewed in the summer. And then a consultation process takes place, and then the ratings are announced in spring for the winter review. So last winter, we had some changes. So we had, due to improved data on rays in particularly in the Bristol Channel and the Celtic Sea, so off the north of Cornwall, we've had some much improved data there. And for the first time ever, Cornwall Good Seafood Guide have been recommending, added to our recommended list, some ray species. So cuckoo ray is now rated a 3 for all capture methods on both north and south coasts. Small-eyed ray has had an improved stock score in the Celtic Sea and Bristol Channel, and now we're recommending, we've added demersal trawl caught small-eyed ray from that area to our recommended list. Thornback ray, we've added thornback ray caught in the Bristol Channel and Celtic Sea to our recommended list, so it's now rated a 3. It's not off the south coast, and this is something that's complicated and difficult, challenging sometimes to communicate to consumers, but it's important that people have a close look at and ask where their fish was caught before they buy it. And then finally, after really good ICES reports showing a recovery of spur dog, which the fishermen have been talking about for many years in the southwest, for the first time ever, spur dog has actually ended up achieving a fairly good rating of 3, which is quite momentous. And actually, it's a difficult one. There doesn't appear to be a really big market for spur dog, because for so long it's been something that was prohibited, but it's something that is going to present an opportunity to the fishing industry, and we really hope that its management stays effective, and that we don't see a crash again in spur dog populations. But at the moment, they're looking very healthy. Okay, so the next slide, is the rating changes made last summer, so 2023. Our bass score improved. This is because of ICES reports showing that fishing pressure was still low and that stock had started to rebuild and is now near maximum sustainable yield. So that's really welcome. Line caught and demersal trawl caught is now rated a 3. Net caught is still rated a 4. There's no targeted net fishing for bass, although it does occur. Brill, we had improved data for the Western Channel. We don't have data for the Celtic Sea. It's just not published, which is a great shame. This is another problem, really. But the Western Channel improved stock score meant the rating's now 3 for brill. Monkfish is still doing very well, both species. And brown crab. So brown crab is currently under review. We still haven't had any an updated stock assessment from Cefas. It's now very overdue, and we're really hoping we get some information on brown crab stocks. Certainly landings are declining and catch per unit effort appears to be declining, so we are concerned, but we haven't been able to publish a rating, and we're until we get hold of that stock assessment. Dover sole, so ratings that have gone down. Dover sole has changed from a 2 to a 3 due to increased fishing pressure in the English Channel. And the big news last summer was pollock. So after fishermen have been reporting pollock becoming slightly more scarce, and certainly there's been less pollock appearing on our markets, ICES last summer reviewed the way they look at pollock, and pollock stock assessments, and it is very difficult because pollock are very hard to assess because they hang around near wrecks and reefs. You can't pick them up in a standard trawl methodology. So, but yeah, the IC's advice for a 0 catch meant that applying our methodology, it gets a default 5 rating. So it went from line caught pollock went from being on our recommended list to a 5, which obviously was bad news. Okay, so this winter, as I said, we've looked at our 50% of our ratings, and we've launched a consultation which actually ended yesterday. We haven't looked through the results of that consultation, so I'm not going to be talking about any scores. You'll have to wait and hear in April when we announce them. But we've introduced a new rating. We've got now Atlantic bluefin tuna line caught rating, which has been consulted on. You're going to hear from Emma, but a lot more about tuna in a minute. But it's a very restricted line caught fishery with only 10 licenses, as far as I'm aware. The stock appear healthy, and it's being very closely monitored. We really hope that this new fishery is well managed going forwards in future years. Obviously, it's a highly valuable fish, and it has been very overfished throughout its range through history, and we hope that doesn't happen again. But it looks like the rating for that will be good. It's this very selective methodology, a capture method, and very strictly managed at this time, which is great. So the rating should be pretty good. Crawfish are very abundant still on the grounds, and the catches are very high. So our stock score is sort of reflecting that. It's changed. And our management has improved. So hopefully we'll hear as well from Emily about that. But they brought in now a winter closure of crawfish fishing, which is really welcome, and an increased minimum landing size, or a standardised minimum landing size. We still feel that there should be more management for crawfish to prevent overfishing, as again, it's a very highly valuable fish. And the fishing industry seem to want more management, and therefore more sort of long-term sustainability, which is really positive. But yeah, that rating's improved. Nurse hounds, we've seen improved stock score due to some ICES data. First time we've had good data, a report from ICES on nurse hounds, which was very welcome. Undulate ray appeared to be doing far better, particularly off the in the channel, and so therefore the ratings for undulate ray look like they're going to improve, and smooth hound rays as well. So there's been quite a few improvements. Staying the same, scallops. We have more data on scallops, and stocks do look healthy. However, they're quite fluctuating. It's quite a complex picture, and we still don't have spatial management in any way of scallop fisheries, apart from a very small number of the MCZs where it's restricted, and SACs where it's restricted. So we felt that there wasn't enough change to have changed the rating in a positive direction for scallop. Pouting, red gurner, dab, gilthead bream, haddock, these have all stayed the same. Trawl caught haddock, this one's gone down due to the risk of capture of Celtic Sea cod and whiting, both of which are recommended 0 catch by ICES. And red mullet, we've seen a changed stock score due to ICES advice recommending that the TAC should be reduced. This is due to concerns for stock. So yeah, wait and see what the ratings are, but they'll be launched in April. So finally, how can a fishery improve its rating? Well, it's quite an exciting time. We've got the fisheries management plans just starting to kick off. All of them are saying we're going to need to prioritise collecting more data. Let's hope that happens and that it's done in a timely manner, so that management can be brought in. Practical management can be brought in, as soon as possible for some of these fisheries where we know that would be a benefit to the environment and to the stocks and to the fishers. But yeah, we've got with increased management, you would end up with better scores. With increased stock data showing good, healthy stocks, you end up with better scores. So there's a lot can be done. Continued improvements of fishing methods as well. Overall, we'd love to see more environmentally friendly and selective fishing methods really being sort of incentivized through future management brought in by our government. And we'd love to see, for example, line caught fishing being really incentivised. If stocks are allowed to recover to a rate where line caught fishing is economically viable for more species, that would be fantastic, and fishermen then wouldn't have to resort to other methods like netting and trawling. And that's where I feel we should be moving. That's my personal view. But yeah, all of these things can in time can help a fishery to improve its rating. And what can you do? Well, mix up your diet, try something new. Always ask how your fish was caught and where it's from. There's a lot of non-Cornish seafood and non-Southwest seafood being sold down here in this region, so make sure it is Cornish. Quite often, people just sort of assume it's Cornish when it isn't always. And make conscious and low impact buying decisions, and try and buy local. So there you go. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and thanks to all of the organisations that we work with, all of the fishermen and all of the fishermen's representatives who get involved in our advisory board, and thanks to Marine Conservation Society, who we work very closely with, university, and all our funders. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Matt. Really fascinating to see those changes again. And I've got a really long list of questions, but for the sake of time, I don't see any questions in the Q&A. No, Martin's saying none. So I think we will just move on quickly to Jacob, and I'm going to hold my questions off for the end of all the presentations, because I think you touched on it, but I think the question might come better after mine on FMPs and thinking about what that might mean. So thank you very much, and over to Jacob.
Yeah, thank you, Libby. I'm just going to share here. Hopefully you can all see that now.
Yeah, looks good.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, just a quick introduction. My name is Jacob Bestwick. I'm a quota manager at the MMO, and I'm just going to do a quick presentation on kind of the uptake that we saw throughout 2023 and how that compares to previous years. Just kind of a caveat to some of this, as Libby mentioned, it's quite difficult to constitute describe what is a normal fishing year. There's a lot of variation year to year, and fisheries management has been changing over the past few years. Things like leaving the common fisheries policy, COVID, we've got fisheries management plans coming in now, so all of that plays a bit of a role in this. So the data I'm going to share is all going to be Southwest area specific. There's a map here that you can see on the right hand side. The area we'll reference is like 7E, F and G on this map. So all the data shown is for 7E to G. So the first graphs we have here, on the left hand side there's a graph showing landings in tonnages across the years. And on the right hand side we've got a graph showing an approximate value of these species, and there's a blue line above that is an inflation adjustment. So you can see here that 2023 landings were down compared to 2022, both in terms of tonnage and value. With value, the graph on the right hand side being particularly down compared to previous years when you bring into account that inflation. But in terms of tonnages, it's probably the total tonnage landed was slightly above kind of 2020 and 2021, but not anywhere near kind of 2022 levels. So there was that significant dip there. In terms of pulling out a few species for you to identify, there's this kind of the methodology I use to what's interesting is kind of looking at what makes up the biggest percentage over and the biggest chunks of the landings. So here you've got these almost like building block graphs that each different color is a species. So I appreciate that those graphs are impossible to look at, but what we've done from that is pick out a few of the potentially interesting ones to look at. So here I've got a graph of a few of maybe what I consider the traditional kind of Southwest stocks. So I think Matt has just mentioned a few of these in his presentation. So we've got mackerel to start with, and you can see here that the landings of that have been kind of falling year on year. there was a brief exception to that in 2021 when they kind of went back up a bit, possibly post-COVID with that low in 2020. But yeah, the landings have then continued to fall in 2022 and 2023. Lemon sole, previously that was a little bit variable. There was that kind of peak in 2021 compared to the previous couple of years, but again, that did fall in 22 and 23. And then I've also got place in here. As you can see, that's kind of been reducing in this kind of stepwise thing every couple of years. So landings have been stable across 22 and 23 with that one. Next, I have pollock. Obviously, there's been a significant reduction in landings kind of over the last few years. Pollock has now moved to become a bycatch only stock for 2024, so there'll be kind of a significant reduction in uptake there. I've also included brill here. Brill in 7E is becoming quota for the first time in 2024. There's a brill 7D and E is become quota. So this isn't brill landings for 7D and E, it's just for 7E here. And that you can see has been increasing a little bit. There was a low there in 2022 and it picked back up again a little bit in 2023. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this stock this year, with it becoming quota and the kind of new rules that come in place with that. So we've also got a few other species here that seem to have been dropping, but have potentially kind of stabilized a little bit compared to some of the others. So edible crab, had seen year-on-year reductions from 2016 down to kind of that 2020 period. Around there, it does seem to have stabilized around that figure a little bit, but again, there was a slight reduction in 23. It's difficult to say for sure, but whether landings will stabilize at about that 4,000 mark. And then welt landings have also seen a general decrease since 2016. Again, 2021 and 22 shows some possible leveling off of landings and some signs settling at around that 3.5 to 4,000. Just to mention as well, sorry, I forgot to mention earlier, on the graphs on this, there's the blue, orange, and grey building blocks. So the blue is where you've got that's from the producer organisations, and then the orange ones will be what we call non-sector vessels that are over 10 meters, and the grey one is the under 10 meter non-sector. So that's the smaller inshore fleet. So you can see what component each of them make up of the landings. So you can see that with whelk, that's a significant chunk of that is from the inshore vessels. Bass landings, we've been seeing some increases in that, and again on that you can see that most of that is made up by the inshore fleet. There was a slight drop in 2022 actually, but then that picked back up again in 2023. And then in terms of sole, we were seeing year-on-year increases in that, up to 2021 being the peak. 2022 and 2023 did see a bit of a drop in terms of sole. That's something that we in the MMO have been doing a bit of work on this year, particularly in the Lyme Bay area, looking at how we manage that. So next, I've got a couple that have seen some significant increases in uptake over the past couple of years. The first of these being scallops. Since 2021, you can see there was that kind of significant increase in scallop. This is thought to be partly due to a result of leaving the common fisheries policy. That meant that effort days didn't apply to the French area of 7E. So 7E has some of that falls within English waters, some of it falls within French waters. So vessels are able to fish in the French part without that counting towards their effort days. So that kind of around 8,000 ton 8,000 ton mark might be the kind of level that we see. 2023, there was a bit of a decrease in that, but there were some management measures brought in for scallop as well, so that has possibly contributed to that slight decrease in uptake there. One that Matt also mentioned earlier was undulate ray. Again, this is a stock that is for 7D and E, so we're just looking at the 7E portion here. But there's been a large kind of increase in undulate ray landings. There's been a significant increase in the quota available. That went from kind of being, I think, 75 tons, the quota for that stock in 2021, due to changes in the advice and the health of the stock. That's now gone up to being over 1,000 tons in 22 and 23. So we have seen quite a significant increase in the landings of that due to that quota availability. Obviously the uptake of that though hasn't really approached anywhere near the kind of quota limit that is set for it. So I think part of that is due to markets and things like that. And we get reports of, people not being able to necessarily achieve the kind of prices that they would like. So I think that has kept uptake down a little bit of that stock. So spur dog has also seen a bit of an increase in landings. Again, that's come from quota availability. Previously, it was prohibited. So I think there's some bycatch landings in there from previous years. This is still mostly bycatch from what we hear from the fishermen, and there are management measures in place for this stock. So again, the quota available for this is significantly kind of higher than the uptake that we see, again, partially down to prices. And as Matt mentioned, we get reports that there's not that much of a market for it at the minute. Bluefin tuna had a commercial fishery for the first time in UK waters in 2023. Uptake of that was just over 20 tons. As you can see there's no kind that's made up by the over 10s. And then crawfish, we've seen a kind of significant jump in landings, particularly in 2023. With a lot of that being from the inshore fleet. I've then also included some stocks that are pretty variable. Cuttlefish and squid, as you can see from this, they do tend to be very variable in terms of levels of uptake, which obviously makes it very difficult to kind of say what is normal for them. This is kind of believed to be in part due to short life cycles and reproductive cycles. So for both of these, there was some kind of low periods in 2020 and 2021. 2023, the cuttlefish landings were quite high, higher than most of the previous years other than 2017. And in squid, there was a bit of a fall, quite a significant fall in landings to kind of almost down to 2020 and 2021 levels. But, looking at the graph, it does seem to be that they fall, and then previous years we see increases again in uptake. So be interesting to see what happens with that this year. And then the other one I've included in here that's been a bit variable is hake. So you can see that really kind of significant steep drop off down from like the peak of 1,500 tons in 2019 down to about 850 tons in 2020 and 2021. That has picked back up the last couple of years in 2022 and 2023 to around that 1,200 ton mark. So it seems that kind of possibly like COVID crash, and then it's begun to pick up again, possibly due to like market demands, etc. We've got a couple more stocks that also show a bit of variability here. So pilchard landings, they, as you can see here, are a bit up and down. It was interesting with this stock, I thought, that actually in 2020 and 2021, you know, which for most of the stocks are COVID affected, seems to be 2020 being one of the peaks there. Over the last 3 years, that has been consistently going up. And you can see that actually there's already a good chunk in 2024 when I did put these graphs together. And that brings us on to lobster. So landings of that have been increasing since the low point in 2020, over 21 and 22. But then 23, we saw kind of a significant drop in landings of that back to below 2020 levels. And you can see here the kind of importance of lobster to the inshore fleet as well, with them making up over half of the uptake for that stock. We have some stocks that are a little bit more stable. They do show some variation, but they kind of have a little bit of stability. So one of those is Skates and Rays. The amount of landings is kind of usually between 13 and 1400 tons. It almost has a bit of a 1 year up, 1 year down approach. Be interesting to see if that continues. Just to point out as well, this Skates and Rays is like a jointly managed. There's a lot of species included in that, but it doesn't include small-eyed ray and undulate ray because we kind of manage them separately and set separate catch limits for those. And with small-eyed ray, we kind of see that that's for 7F and G, and that tends to be fairly limited by the quotas. So we get, as the UK, we get a small allocation of that, and we tend to kind of fish up to the level of that allocation. But with Skates and Rays, 2023 was actually up on 2022 and 2021. So there was some increased uptake of that. You can see the uptake from the inshore fleet is not as big as some other stocks, but it does form, I think, quite a significant component of their catch. We've also got anglerfish on here. So again, that's been a bit up and down over recent years, but 2020, 2021 and 2023 all about the same sort of level, just over that 2,200 ton mark. 2022 there, possibly the exception being slightly higher. And then one I've not put the graph on for, but spider crab landings are fairly consistent at around 350 tons since 2020. So just one to point out there. That's the last stocks I've got for you, but just as a bit of a summary, there's quite a few stocks that don't show much year-on-year stability, particularly things like cuttlefish and squid. We have had quite a bit of a change in the composition of landings, but I think overall uptake has generally been down in the in that southwest 7E to G area. When you compare 2023 to 2022, there was definitely a reduction there, and I think that's highlighted by the kind of initial graphs, the overall landings and value being down.
Amazing. Thanks, Jacob. Absolutely fascinating as well. What a picture we're getting. These talks kind of all stitched together so nicely. So yeah, I don't think there's any questions in the chat.
No, there isn't. No. But have we got time for one?
Yeah, we've got time for one. Go for it.
Yeah, I think I probably know the answer to this, Jacob. But obviously, the precipitous decline in landings for mackerel and pollock are two obviously key species off the south coast here in particular. Is that entirely due to overfishing in the region generally, with some of these larger boats affecting our sort of coastal areas? or is there any hint of climate change might be affecting these stocks as well for pollock and mackerel? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the answers isn't the same for both stocks. So with pollock, we're not really beginning to see that in other areas. With mackerel, the trend in the southwest is a little bit different to the kind of overall UK trend, and I think particularly like we're seeing mackerel in more so in the North Sea stock. The landings trend there is a bit different, which obviously could indicate that we're potentially seeing them move northwards due to warming waters. I think with pollock, we're not really seeing that same trend, so it's probably a different answer for the two stocks there.
Okay,
and I know from kind of my experience of speaking to some fishermen in the North Sea stock, they have said that they are seeing it on the ground a little bit more last year. But there are different management measures in place for the Western and the North Sea stock at the moment, so that does have a little bit of a impact on the ability to on their uptake there.
Okay, thanks. No more questions actually in the Q&A, but great talk. Thanks, Jacob.
Right, I've got a long list forming for kind of after all the talks, because I just think this is so interesting. But yeah, we'll pass on over to Emily, because I think everyone will be dying to hear about bluefin tuna. So thanks for joining us, Emily, and go for it.
Thanks, Libby, and thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure to present here, which is nice. So I'll just share my screen a second, and hopefully you'll be able to see it. Is that all good to go?
Yeah, that's great, Emily.
Oh, perfect. Thanks. So yeah, my name's Emily Theobald. I'm the Principal Marine Officer for the Southwest at the MMO, quite a wordy title, I suppose. But essentially, I lead a team of Marine Officers and Senior Marine Officers. And as a team of about 15 of us, we regulate fisheries in the Southwest. So that's everything from catch inspections on board boats and gear inspections to fish market inspections to restaurant inspections, to make sure that every step of that chain of fisheries is correct. So quite a job, I suppose, in the Southwest, wrangling the Southwest fishing fleet, and never a day without a challenge. So yeah, I guess the question, which is fisheries, was 2023 a normal year for fisheries? Absolutely not, I suppose, for bluefin tuna. This is a really different set of different fishery, I suppose, and it's definitely not normal. And this is the first time, as Jacob said, that this fishery has been commercially licensed in the UK or in UK waters. So really exciting time, and also a really busy time, as this fishery came on relatively quickly. So we had to kind of adapt and make sure everything was in order to run this fishery last year. So if you don't know too much about bluefin tuna, Turnus tinus, they are absolutely massive, the biggest of the tuna species. And we've seen a recent kind of shift, I suppose, in abundance in the UK or in UK waters of bluefin tuna. Lots of different theories as to why. There's been links to kind of Atlantic multi-decadal oscillations and kind of ocean warming, to food abundance and availability. Different theories, and I know that Exeter University and their projects have been touching on that. But they have really, I mean, I guess they're kind of like the Ferraris of the ocean world. It's so perfectly designed. They've got this kind of collapsible dorsal fin on the top, and these kind of small finlets at the back which pivot and can give direction. And they're just, I suppose when you see them, they're just absolutely huge. They're just such solid fish, and really, really impressive. And I'm sure if you've spent any time on the coast at all in the Southwest over the last few years, you can see them by eye walking along the coast path, just huge shoals of them, and they jump up the water. And they love it here because there's lots of sardines and small pelagics for them to feed on. We're seeing huge numbers of them off the shores relatively close in the Southwest. We also have other tuna species that pop up in fisheries here. The left is albacore tuna. We see them occasionally come up in fisheries, not so much a coastal species. We don't get them coming in on inshore boats, but we do some of the kind of deeper water pelagic boats. We see albacore tuna turning up. And then the right picture is bonito, another tuna species. And we do see these actually turning up semi-regularly in the later months of the summer. So yeah, when we get people ringing in saying, oh, we've got a bluefin tuna, and then you go to inspect it and it's actually a bonito, and it's slightly disappointing for them. So I'm here to talk about bluefin tuna today, but I'm happy to talk, let's touch on crawfish later on if people have got crawfish questions as well. But for the minute, I'll touch on tuna moving forwards. But so we are an ICAT member, so the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tuna. So all of our fisheries is bound by ICAT rules and regulations. Quite a kind of, yeah, I guess like a highly regulated, strict fishery. And I'll just talk you through the different types of fisheries that we have here in the UK, because it wasn't just a commercial programme that me and my team were regulating. So I'll just break them down. So we've got a commercial fishery which ran last year and will be running this year as a trial fishery again. We've also got a bycatch programme. We've also got the chart fishery, and we've got a recreational fishery. So I'll just touch on them in detail. So the commercial fishery, last year we had 10 vessels on the scheme. This year, the plan is to have 13 vessels on the scheme, but the quota is going to be exactly the same. So it just means that each vessel gets less quota this year than last year. Each vessel is capped using quota. Last year, I think it was 3.9 tons of quota per vessel. This year, it will be less than that. None of the vessels actually caught their quota. Catching bluefin tuna, as many as there are, is actually quite difficult and quite skillful. So there wasn't that many people that actually caught anywhere near the full tonnage allowance. There's no limit on the amount of fish they can catch per day, but there is a limit on how many fish they can fit on their boats. So we have everything from like a 5.6 meter vessel on the trial to like an 11 meter vessel on the trial, but all the vessels on the trial are under 12 meters, so they're still small coastal boats. So yeah, the smaller boats have a bit more difficulty actually fitting the tuna on the boats. So they have a minimum conservation reference size of 115 centimeters from the fork of the tail to the nose of the fish. And they have a minimum weight as well of 30 kilos. We actually didn't see very many fish at all under sort of 70 kilos. Most of the fish were well above 100 kilos. I think the biggest fish was something like 260 kilos. We actually saw better money going for the smaller fish, however. I think maybe because processors prefer to be able to buy a whole fish and then break down and process that fish themselves, whereas the big fish, the 200, 220 kilo fish, are quite hard to transport, break down, and the market really hasn't developed in the UK yet to be able to handle these fish. So we're kind of seeing a bit of the fisheries almost ahead of the market in the UK at the minute, which is like an unusual situation to be in. So the commercial fishery was really highly regulated. So the fishermen needed to be registered using what's called an EBCD, which is an electronic bluefin catch document. So once they caught a fish, they had to ring us to let them know that they caught a fish and that they were going to be heading into port. They also needed to have an electronic bluefin catch document, which is what they would get from ICAT. So ICAT would produce a document, and that basically has the weight of the fish, where they caught it, the registration of the boat, before they then took that fish off of the boat and sold it. So all of that documentation and the notification needed to be in place before they took the fish off the vessel. They also then needed to fill in their catch app, which is what all small scale vessels filled in. So they have an app which they fill in of what they caught, how much they caught of it. So from like an admin perspective, there was quite a lot to be done for this fishery. We would then, once we received the call that a bluefin was being landed into Newlyn, for instance, we would send officers down there. The officer would measure and weigh the fish, make sure the fish was compliant, check the documentation, and make sure that it was going to a registered buyer. So really highly regulated in comparison to some other fisheries. They mainly use quite heavy gear, so big rods and reels, and what's called spreader bars. So I've got a photo of spreader bars in the last slide, but they almost look like kind of Christmas trees, which have big squidlers on them, and they just surface troll these squidlers across the surface of the water for just like almost in transects. And they were not allowed to bait or chum the water. So yeah, quite strict kind of regulations in regard to baiting and chumming. So that's the commercial trial, and this is going to happen again this year, as I said, just with a number of vessels on the scheme. We've also got a bycatch scheme. Oh, just to go back, actually, sorry. So those bags are, we refer to them as body bags, which I don't know if it's that nice of a term, but they have these really good bags which are insulated, which they pack with ice, they bleed and store the tuna correctly, almost like sashimi grade style packing of the fish. Then you can see on the bycatch scheme where they accidentally catch tuna, it's not quite as it's not quite as beautiful packaging for the fish. So the bycatch scheme is particularly relevant for ring netters working in the sardine fishery or gill net fishermen. Essentially, they are allowed, if they catch a bluefin tuna and it's dead in their nets, they are allowed to land it, and they're allowed to land 1 fish per trip. So get quite a lot of bluefin tuna turning up in the ring net fishery, of course, because they feed on sardine. So the bluefin tuna would often get stuck at the bottom of the nets, and because it's packed full of sardine, they end up dead. So the bycatch scheme allows these fishermen to land 1 bluefin tuna per trip. Same requirements apply. They have to give us notification that they've got a bluefin tuna on board, and they also have to have an electronic bluefin catch document before they land. So and again, it has to go on their logbook or catch apps. So again, exactly the same regulations apply. And if we can get officers down to measure and weigh it, then we will. The fish must be released, however, if it's alive. So if it does come up in ring nets and it is alive, then it must be released, or in gill nets, for instance. But it's quite unlikely that that's going to happen. Moving on to chart. So the chart scheme is not continuing this year, but it has been running for a number of years. It's a scientific tagging program run by Cefas, where they would tag bluefin tuna to get kind of spatial data, biometric data on the fish. And this has kind of built up a bit of a database of bluefin tuna in the UK, and alongside the Exeter University project, which Tom Horton and the team at Exeter have been running for a number of years, which has given a lot more of a scientific kind of backing to this fishery. But this is not continuing in 2024. However, we have got a recreational fishery, which is being developed this year. So DEFRA are in progress of developing legislation to establish a permit scheme for recreational fishermen this year, and that'll be a catch and release recreational fishery. So no one will be able to land the bluefin tuna they catch. This is to provide kind of, I suppose, I mean, a lot of it's happening anyway, so this allows us to be able to manage the fishery effectively. At the moment, we don't have any legislation to manage recreational fisheries, so this statutory instrument that we'll be bringing in will help us be able to manage recreational fisheries effectively. It's really popular. It's a big game fish. People pay a lot of money to come and fish with bluefin tuna. So these permits will be super helpful in allowing us to regulate this fishery effectively. Also really, really cool in a socio kind of economic aspect, because we'll bring a lot of money to the Southwest for people wanting to come and go game fishing, I suppose. So yeah, just a massive thank you. There's quite a few people that pulled this fishery together, really, really quick. So just a massive thank you and shout out to the marine officers in the Southwest team and the senior marine officers who dropped everything at times to run to specific ports. Some days we had 15 fish being landed across various ports in the Southwest. So, these guys got out and measured fish and weighed fish at heinous times in the evening and the morning and across all of Cornwall. The fishermen who are part of the trial, who, for the most part, abided by all of the regulations and the things that we were asking them to do. The internal MMO teams who supported us with our endless questions about what happens if they don't have this, and also to Cornwall IFCA, who we did several kind of joint patrols on St Piran with them to regulate this fishery. And also just a shout out, happy International Women's Day for all the women working in fisheries across the Southwest and UK wide. Really cool to see so many women working in fisheries now. But happy to talk crawfish. I'm probably running out of time, but I've left my email address at the bottom, and also the bluefin tuna page if anyone's got any questions, because that page is regularly updated with bluefin tuna information. Cool, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I feel really reassured, having known there was a kind of tuna commercial fishery, but actually not knowing very much about it, to see a fishery like that is so highly regulated. I don't think we've got any questions in the Q&A, but I've got one, which is, I know we can't see into the future, especially with fisheries, but certainly for the next few years, do you anticipate the kind of level of regulation staying that high? Because obviously that's a huge amount of effort.
Yeah, it's a really tough, like I would absolutely love for regulation to stay this high. I think in general, most of the non-compliant issues are coming from just like admin things, so catch records, catch documents, things like that, which just weren't in place. So I think, you know, well over 95% of the fish landed were actually compliant, in terms of maybe even higher than 95% actually, just in terms of minimum landing size and weight and things like that. So it was actually just the regulatory admin side of things that was causing the problems. Yeah, I'd absolutely love for it to stay this highly regulated. In a sense, it's probably one of the best regulated tuna fisheries in the world, I'd say, in terms of the number of vessels. They're small scale. They barely have to leave the port to catch a fish. That's the other thing. It's really low fuel usage. They don't travel very far to catch these fish. So yeah, it's a great fishery, and I'd love to see it continue in the way that it is now.
Brilliant, thank you. I see Matt's got his hand up. Do you want to ask a question, Matt?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Emily. It's really, again, you know, to echo what Libby said, it's really reassuring to hear how well it's being done. Couple of quick questions. What happens if they accidentally get more than one tuna in a ring net? And does that happen very often?
We haven't had a ring netter. We haven't had a ring netter ring in and say we've caught two. What do we do?
Is that because it hasn't happened, or because they don't want to tell you?
That's so that's another question in itself, because because bluefin are a now quota species, they are subject to the landing obligation. So it means if they do catch two tuna, essentially they have to land it. But this is where we end up with a conflict between the landing obligation and then enforcement, because the landing obligation says that they have to land it, but if they land it, they know that they're going to get in trouble. So the landing obligation, in a sense, I know tried to tackle problems, but actually all it has done is increase the number of discards or blacking fish. So we have a really difficult conundrum whereby people don't want to land things that are part of the landing obligation because they know they might get in trouble. So the landing obligation is there, I suppose, to discourage bad practice, to make sure that people are trying to move away from catching two tuna, for instance, or pollock in their nets. But yeah, we haven't had any instances of that. But whether that means that if they catch two tuna, they discard one, you know, it's really, really hard to tell. I would say that the ring net fleet have remote electronic monitoring on board their vessels as part of the Cornish Sardine Management Association. So you know, they are highly monitored in that sense, like camera wise. So yeah, we haven't had any compliance issues from that perspective.
In a way, you would sort of hope that if they're killed, they should be able to land them and not get in trouble, because then you'd know scientifically what was really going on, rather than.
And yeah, and this is the complications of the landing obligation.
I've got another question. What happens if a fish ever got landed illegally and then got into sort of and got processed and sold? Are there things in place that would flag that up and result in that being found out very easily? How's the traceability organised through that chain?
So all, like I said, all vessels have to submit a catch record of what they've caught. That then normally gets married up with a sales note. So whoever buys the fish first sale has to submit a sales note for that fish. So we normally have then a chain of the vessel it came from to the time it's been bought by the first buyer. If a fish has been landed illegally, and then gets sold to a processor or a restaurant, something like that, normally we get intelligence, and our intelligence systems are quite good. I'd say we end up with quite strong intelligence people ring and tell us things. But we also inspect restaurants regularly, particularly ones that buy first sale fish. We go through their fridges, we see what they have on the property. We then ask them for the paperwork to see if they can account for all the fish in their fridges and their freezers to match up. So if we find fish that hasn't got paperwork associated with it, then we start to question where they got that fish from, why there isn't paperwork with it, or why there isn't a sales note of where they bought it from. So the Regulated Buyers Sellers Act is what kind of Registered Buyers and Sellers Act, sorry, is what kind of regulates that sales side of things. But blacking is a problem. We know it's a problem if people land fish and sell it through unauthorized channels, then it definitely can be missed. We do our best to try and pick up on everything from an intelligence perspective and also from an inspection perspective on restaurants and buyers and sellers.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, 2 tricky ones.
No worries.
Really good. Martin.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, that was fascinating. I was really interested in the comment you made about the relative value of different sizes of the bluefin. And so given that we're also looking at trying to get this catch and release recreational fishery, which could be very, very productive and obviously and profitable, and the bigger the fish, the more fun it is for the catchers, I imagine, and also the potential for sort of ecotourism and wildlife watching. I wonder whether there's something to look at in terms of a maximum landing size as well as a minimum landing size for bluefin if the really big ones don't get proportionally as much value for the fishery. It could well enable those larger fish to stay in the sea.
Yeah, it's a good point. And maximum landing size has been quite effective on things like spur dog, for instance, where we have a maximum landing size to protect breeding females. So yeah, a maximum landing size is a great technical conservation measure to protect the breeding stock. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good idea. Yeah, and like I said, the bigger fish themselves didn't tend to make too much money, but we also didn't see too much difference in fish that were caught using rod and line, selectively bled, selectively cut and gutted and stored correctly versus the fish that were pulled up in ring nets. We actually didn't see too much of a price difference, which is kind of interesting when you're thinking about like the treatment of the fish. And yeah, so but that may be down to the fact that the UK market isn't as developed enough to kind of selectively pick good standard of fish. As the market develops, I wonder whether we'll see a bit more selectivity on those kind of fish that have had better care and better like bleeding and filleting, things like that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Loads and loads of food for thought. And I think we should have some time for some more questions at the end because I've definitely got some. So thank you, Emily. And I'm going to try and share my screen, and everyone's technology has worked beautifully, which probably means that I'm going to be the one that lets the team down today. Hopefully not. Let's start there. And let's go to share. How does that look for everyone? Yeah, great. Fantastic. So it is down to me after an absolutely brilliant 4 kind of really real world talks to kind of ruin things with the national policy update. But hopefully I've got lots of beautiful pictures in here to keep everyone interested. And actually, I think it's a really exciting time for policy at the moment. And, that is what is underlying all of these kind of wins, successes, improvements that we are starting to see. Not to say there isn't an awful lot of work to do. So 2023 was another big year for fisheries policy. So I think this is my 3rd year maybe chairing South West Marine Ecosystems. And we've kind of looked at the development of fisheries management plans from the very start. And now we have the first 5 published. So a lot of today's talk will be a little bit more detail about what fisheries management plans actually do. It's DEFRA been working on these and publishing these plans. So this is kind of a slightly outside perspective and trying to think about what it means for the Southwest. So I'll go through what an FMP actually looks like, what environmental commitments there are in FMPs, and also thinking about that evidence. Matt picked up on the fact that there's still lots and lots of stocks that we don't know enough about. And we can have a little bit of a think about how FMPs might help us to improve that. I also want to talk a bit about the management of forage fish populations, partly because although it's not Southwest relevant, we obviously saw the closure of the North Sea sand eel fishery in UK waters this year, which is pretty momentous. And as much as it's not Southwest, I felt like it needed a bit of a shout out. And also thinking further down the line with the Celtic Sea pelagic FMP, thinking about your own work, what are we going to be looking at for other forage fish, and what does ecosystem-based management look like in the Southwest? So I think they're the two big kind of policy areas I want to cover today. So this is my most boring slide, so don't worry, it hopefully only gets better from here. But it is really important to understand what a fisheries management plan is, because I think there's sometimes a bit of a difference between expectation and reality. I think firstly, they're iterative and they are a plan. That's something that I have to remind myself of a lot. So the published plans are the start of a process, really, in a lot of ways. According to the Fisheries Act, an FMP is a document that's prepared and published under that Act, and it sets out the policies designed to really make fisheries more sustainable in relation to fish stocks, which is quite an important point. The Fisheries Act lays out some really specific things that an FMP must do. You know, it must mention who the relevant authority is, that all that kind of legal stuff. But really, it's very focused on kind of the process, and around stocks maximum sustainable yield is the kind of main legal angle for FMPs as laid out in the Fisheries Act. The Joint Fisheries Statement, which is really worth the read. Fisheries Act, read the Fisheries Act objectives, really recommend them. So maybe the first 10 pages. And the JFS, if you work in fisheries or environmental, any kind of environmental sector in the Southwest, it's a really useful document. The Joint Fisheries Statement kind of put FMPs in a bit of a broader context, so it widens it out from that really narrow angle laid out in the Fisheries Act. So it kind of sets the overall purpose of FMPs, how they're going to deliver those Fisheries Act objectives. So there's the precautionary objective, which is about fishing to MSY and precautionary approach. There's a sustainability objective, which is all about balancing the kind of 3 pillars of sustainability, the ecosystem objective, national benefit objective. There's 8 in total. So yeah, go away and have a look. But kind of the JFS really kind of links those two things a little bit more clearly. So there aren't fisheries management plans for every single species or stock. So there is no bluefin FMP, for example. But the JFS states that FMPs are published for those stocks that are kind of the most important from social and economic point of view, or a risk of overfishing, or have some kind of ecosystem significance. I think the list published in the JFS, so sort of page 55 onwards, again, really important part, can change. So we have seen additional species scoped into some FMPs that haven't been laid out in the JFS. So it's not completely fixed. And yeah, the FMPs do focus on the sustainable management of stocks, but it does say in the JFS that they can be extended to consider kind of wider fisheries management issues, be they environmental, social, or economic. So the legal kind of line on FMPs is that they only have to do quite a narrow job, which is all about stocks. The JFS opens it a little bit more widely. So the first FMPs were published this year. Was it just before Christmas? I can't remember whether it's just before or just after Christmas now, but we have 5 published FMPs, and there will be another published this year of the front runners. So most relevant to the Southwest are those kind of highlighted in black. So we've got a bass FMP, a king scallop FMP, crab and lobster FMP, which does include spiny lobster to some extent, a whelk FMP, and the channel non-quota demersal, which is an absolute mammoth FMP of 14 different species. The Southern North Sea and Eastern Channel mixed blackfish FMP is obviously less relevant to this geographic area, and that's yet to be published. So we do kind of know what they look like now. So we know what the JFS says, and we know what the Fisheries Act says, but what do they actually do? Well, the published FMPs do definitely focus on the stock overall, but they all include the environment to some extent, which is a positive, considering they don't absolutely have to. And I think it's really important to note they're all slightly different. I'll talk about FMP governance in a second, but each FMP is doing something slightly different, trialing a slightly different co-management mechanism, different delivery partners. And so although they kind of follow some kind of standard template, they are all slightly different with slightly different emphases. The kind of government website has loads. I checked it the other day, and it's got loads of information on there now about the published FMPs, their environment reports, which I'll touch on later, and also on the upcoming FMPs, which are particularly important for the Southwest. So really recommend going on there and having a bit of a nose around. As I mentioned, they've all got different governance mechanisms. So the king scallop FMP, the main delivery partner was kind of Seafish and the scallop industry group. Seafish also kind of ran the crab and lobster and whelk FMPs. The bass FMP was delivered by DEFRA and a sort of DEFRA subsidiary called Policy Lab, who are really great at kind of trialing different co-management methods. The MMO have, I think, had some of the hardest FMPs to do in terms of the species and kind of geographic coverages. So they ran the channel non-quota demersal, which was that group of 14 different species. And then being developed at the moment, there's the Sprat FMP, which is run by Cefas, which covers the Channel as well as the North Sea. The Southern North Sea and Channel skates and rays, so it does come into this area in the Channel, and the cockle FMP, which not huge cockle fisheries down here generally, but all cockle fisheries are covered by that, and that is run by AIFCA. So we have quite a few different delivery partners for the different FMPs. I think as a stakeholder, I can imagine it's incredibly difficult to keep track of and to understand where best to put your effort. So I guess today is just a bit of a cry to kind of keep an eye on FMPs, engage where you can, you know, even if you have to be really cutthroat about which are your most relevant or that you're most interested in. They are trialing co-management. That co-management has, I think, mostly started with industry because of the nature of the plans on stocks, but I think most are open to kind of wider engagement to some extent. And they all have different geographic coverages, and some of them are joint plans as well. I'll talk about a little bit later about some of the Marine Directorate-led FMPs because they are very relevant to the Southwest still. Some of them cover quite large chunks of English waters. So what does an FMP look like? So as I said, they're all slightly different, but in general, they do a really good kind of review of landings and look at the scope and status of the stocks. They have some kind of vision and goals. Quite often those have been set out by a co-management group, which might have been mostly industry focused or industry and regulators, but in some cases, those groups were much wider. The Bass FMP had an arm's length body steering group, as well as I think a separate stakeholder group. I know the Channel non-quota demersal FMP had an evidence advisory group. So they have these kind of different governance models that feed into these different kind of visions and goals. They quite often have split the goals up in some way. Sometimes they're about the fisheries, social and economic goals and evidence goals. Sometimes there are specific environmental goals. They have harvest strategies, which is about kind of the stock side of things and how they're going to get to a point where MSY can be measured. You know, for if you've got 14 species that are non-quota, the chances are that an awful lot of those there's no stock assessment for. So it's got to lay out the plan to get to a point where MSY can be calculated or a proxy of for potentially 14 species in one FMP. So really big jobs. FMPs are highlighting an awful lot of evidence gaps, which is a useful exercise, but it does come up with a bit of a daunting wish list in terms of research. They identify management strategies and management measures wherever possible. And they do consider the wider environment, which I'll talk about next. All FMPs also have to say something about how they're going to be implemented, monitored and reviewed. So I mentioned that the FMPs are iterative. They have to be reviewed, I think, at least every 6 years. But I think for most FMPs, that really the plan is just that. It sets out how we're going to get to some of them come up with some very quick management measures that can be implemented now. An awful lot of them also identify kind of longer term goals where there might need to be more evidence or thinking or stakeholder working before they can kind of say exactly what management needs to come out of that goal. For example, considering different harvest strategies for bass other than MSY, compared to maybe a management measure that can be put in place now, like changing a minimum conservation reference size. So that's the kind of difference between some of the short and longer term goals. And we're just starting to see kind of what might come out of implementation. So I think that this year is a big year, even for the published FMPs, to see kind of what management actually looks like afterwards. So FMPs and the environment. So one thing to note, and it's a really boring process point, so I won't dwell on it, but FMPs are subject to strategic environmental assessment. So they do have scoping and environment reports, which are published. They were published after the FMPs, but they are available online on the Fisheries Management Plan sort of .gov.uk website. And I really recommend, if you're interested in the environment, you're interested in fisheries, take the time, maybe just choose one that you're most interested in and have a look. Those SEAs have been informed by advice from Natural England and JNCC in English waters. And we were asked to give our first ever advice on UK marine strategy. Now, bear in mind, the UK marine strategy has been in place since 2010. Why is this the first time we've been asked for advice under it? And I think really UKMS is very broad, very high level. It's not necessarily designed to directly inform management, but at the same time, they're probably the most relevant environmental targets we have. The ecosystem objective in the Fisheries Act now ties the UK marine strategy very closely into fisheries management. So we have a new kind of policy driver in the ecosystem objective that makes us scrutinise fisheries management from a UK marine strategy, good environmental status perspective, much more closely for the first time. Which basically just means that we have and kind of some ecosystem measure that we can hold FMPs accountable for. Obviously, a lot of the things that the UK Marine Strategy measures, there's a series of descriptors, and they measure things like biodiversity, food webs, really high level, really commercial fish stocks, really high level kind of descriptors. And each fisheries management plan, you know, if you think in a place like the Southwest, you've got lots and lots of overlapping FMPs with different geographical coverages and different governance models. So it's really important to acknowledge that each FMP is going to make a contribution to good environmental status, which is the kind of the target that we're aiming for under the UK Marine Strategy. No FMP alone really is going to be able to deliver GES on its own. So the SNCB advice that kind of flowed in to inform some of the fisheries management plan work has identified a series of strategic actions that FMPs can contribute to. And those, unsurprisingly, around benthic impacts, bycatch of generally cetacean seabird seals, reduction of prey. So kind of think about food webs, again, mostly about forage fish, our advice is focused, and also litter. And that's very much from a UK marine strategy point of view. So we have maintained that really important link between FMPs and the environment. I don't think it's the focus of fisheries management plans, understandably at the moment. But there are now sort of levers that exist and links between FMPs and wider environmental legislation that means that we need to keep a really close eye on how FMPs help to deliver those goals. Not a small task. So I think we've talked a little bit about the published FMPs. We've also got Tranche 3 fisheries management plans. So there's Sprat, which includes the English Channel, Queen Scallop, Skates and Rays, which includes the English Channel. Skates and Rays in the Bristol Channel are actually part of the Celtic Sea demersal FMP. There's a Cockle FMP, and then the Southern North Sea non-quota demersal, which is slightly less relevant to this area, just to give you a feel for what's coming up. And then Tranche 4, which I think will be of interest to everyone in the room. There's the Black Sea Bream FMP, the Rasses Complex Fisheries Management Plan, and then the Celtic Sea Pelagic and Celtic Sea demersal FMP. So Celtic Sea Pelagic includes a lot of those species that Jeroen talked about. And the demersal FMP is another big group, mixed group of species that including rays, including some whitefish, including all sorts actually. And some of those, so the two Celtic Sea FMPs are joint plans with Welsh Government. Just wanted to note as well that there are some devolved administration-led FMPs in the Southwest. My presentation is very much from an English waters point of view. So Welsh Government have 3 FMPs that will just cover Welsh waters, working to slightly longer timeframes. And then the other thing to note is that some of the FMPs covered by the Marine Directorate in Scotland include really big geographic areas for big stocks. So things like mackerel, Northern Shelf mackerel includes a lot of English waters. Northern Shelf hake, I think there is only one FMP for hake, and it is the Marine Directorate led one. So if those are stocks that you're interested in, you may also need to keep an eye on how FMPs are delivering in Scotland. On that, as a stakeholder, if you're interested in FMPs and you haven't managed to do that just yet, how can you get involved in their development? So again, if you go to the website that was kind of earlier on in this talk, I'm really happy to send it to anyone, then you can register interest with all of the upcoming FMPs. So I think there are email addresses for the MMO for a lot of the Tranche 4 FMPs. and you can contact and ask, kind of register an interest and keep updated with those. FMPs are trialing different co-management structures, and I think from an environmental point of view, I think there has been limited engagement in some cases so far. But the more people show interest, I think if people start to lose that kind of energy because they are so complex, then there's risk of really losing that. So kind of a plea to everyone to kind of, you know, try and maintain that interest and show that interest to DEFRA in FMP development. So yeah, register your interest in those specific FMPs. There are often, once you're kind of getting those regular communications, there are quayside meetings. Sometimes they'll be just for industry, sometimes they will be more open. Totally appreciate that it can be a bit daunting going to one of those if you're not industry, but there are usually webinars. All FMPs legally required to go to public consultation. So even if you don't get a chance to get involved beforehand, there is that sort of more formal route. And something that's becoming increasingly obvious is that I think I went to an evidence partnership meeting that DEFRA ran a couple of weeks ago in London with some people on the call today. And I think the front runner FMPs, the first 6 FMPs identified over 300 evidence gaps, a lot of which are to do with sort of stock assessment, but lots of other things as well. And that's for the first 6. DEFRA are being really open to say that they cannot fund all of those evidence gaps. And as we have 43 FMPs in total across the devolved administrations, you can imagine how big the task is. And so DEFRA are being really open in that they want to look to kind of different partnerships and ways of working to fill those FMP evidence gaps. There is an online workshop in March that Katie Sinjinglu and DEFRA is organising. I can't remember the date. Yeah, I don't want to say the wrong one. I think I know it, but I don't want to say it. But again, if you're interested, I can put you in touch. So drop me an email. So there are ways to get involved in FMPs. But I appreciate it's a big programme of work, and as a stakeholder, it can feel daunting. Okay, just want to talk briefly about forage fish. So as many of you will know, the North Sea sand eel fishery was closed. This is something that people have been campaigning for 30 years. There is a huge amount of evidence for. And forage fish, as we've talked about a lot today, are a really important part of that ecosystem, linking the sort of zooplankton with large fish, marine mammals, seabirds, kind of such an important part of that ecosystem. There are lots of drivers for thinking about maybe managing forage fish slightly differently. So the UK Marine Strategy is one of those, and the Ecosystem Objective in the Fisheries Act. Avian influenza and the reductions in seabird populations and the English Seabird Conservation and Recovery Pathway kind of highlighting the fact that we need to do more. Seabirds are not doing well by any measure, whether you look at the OSPAR Quality Status Report or the UK Marine Strategy, we need to do more. So there are lots of different drivers for thinking about managing forage fish differently. There's also this guy. I think he's probably one of the single greatest drivers at the moment. Wild Isles, hugely popular, a lot of public interest in this as well, which I think probably helped to get the sand eel position over the line. And I just really want to briefly touch on the ecosystem-based approach to fisheries management from a Natural England point of view, because it doesn't always constitute an outright ban. The sand eel fishery was probably a bit of a one-off in terms of the evidence around it, the kind of political situation with Brexit and where those kind of who prosecuted those fisheries. I don't think that Natural England certainly would expect to talk about forage fish and expect to see lots of bans of fishing for those other forage fish species. I think that's really important to say. We certainly look to some of the policies in the US and Canada. They both have forage fish policies that are really interesting, quite brief and quite easy to read. That are mostly around just thinking about those populations of fish slightly differently and managing them accordingly. So thinking about predator needs and setting catch limits, including environmental factors in setting catch limits. So there are now versions of MSY that can incorporate for some species, including cod in the Northeast Atlantic, thinking about some of those kind of temperature thresholds that can actually impact stock assessments. And we know those populations and how they respond to those environmental variables well enough to actually combine that into some of that catch setting sort of threshold. So there's something called FECO that a chap called Jacob Bentley, who's now at Natural England, did a lot of work on. And ecosystem-based approach can also be about kind of thinking about how you balance those different, being much more kind of open and transparent in balancing those different factors when you're determining the management. So I just wanted to sort of touch on the fact that if we're thinking about forage fish management outside the North Sea, it isn't just about banning all forage fish fisheries, some of which are incredibly important in the Southwest. So just a little bit of a 2023 summary. The start of the road slide I included in my presentation 2-3 years ago. We're a lot further down that road now. For me, it's kind of thinking about how close we are to an ecosystem-based approach to fisheries management. And I think for now, we've sort of secured those links between FMPs and the wider environment. That is the first step, but there's an awful lot of work still to be done. And that is it from me. I think by some miracle, we are finishing presentations pretty much on time. Couple of questions. Let me open them up. Martin's coming back online.
Yeah.
Stop sharing.
Oh, it just says, Libby, you've not given your email address. Easy question, that one.
libby.west@naturalengland.org, but I'll pop it in the chat. Or yeah, I'll pop it in the chat.
That's it for the questions at the moment. Anyone got any questions at all for the last 2 or 3 speakers? We've got 10 minutes, so there's a chance to pick up a couple of questions. Yeah. From Robin, great webinar, Libby, thanks. Do you think that MSY is the best strategy for bass?
Oh, that's very specific. Probably not. I think there are other versions of MSY that could be could include the kind of greater interest in bass. So which one would be? So thinking about maximum economic yield, some of the versions of MSY that kind of look at leaving more larger fish, or kind of trying to leave populations with more larger fish are interesting. I think that all needs to be looked at, and I think hopefully the Bass FMP will do that. I think we're becoming more open to the fact that MSY might not be the best tool for everything, but I think for an awful lot of stocks, it'd be nice to get to MSY first, wouldn't it? Because we're not there for quite a lot already. So yeah, for bass in particular, definitely needs some looking at more widely. I see MSY as a bit of a stepping stone in some cases. I've got some questions. I'm just trying to send that first. Let me just find them. I had one for Jacob by the notebook. Other panelists, feel free to ask questions as well. Oh, for Jacob, I was just wondering, for some of the stocks, so COVID generally saw a decline in landings for an awful lot of stocks. It might just be my memory, but it looked like for a couple of things like whelk, they actually either maintained or even increased a little bit in that year, in those kind of years. And I was just wondering whether there'd been much analysis of kind of the trends in COVID and much understanding of kind of why some fisheries might have actually been able to keep going, and are they more resilient? Just wondering about that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like generally there was a decline. I think a lot of it as well, down to things like markets, restaurants, usage, that sort of thing. We as a team haven't done all that much analysis on the kind of specific trends of any of the stocks. And I mean, some of them we have done, the things that are important to us as the quota team, things like sole and hake, we saw, obviously those kind of high-end flatfish that the markets just obviously weren't there for them at the time. I think some of the things that were increased, it would be interesting to have a look at them more. Obviously the reasons for the declines are quite specific, but yeah, be interesting to look at some of the increases.
Yeah, it's always so complicated, isn't it? Anyone else got any more questions? I've still got loads. Oh, sorry, today my brain is just pinging. Such an interesting session. Is that you, Matt? Yeah, go. Oh, Martin, Matt.
Yeah, how are flounder stocks? Robin asks.
Oh, does anyone
Do you
know?
know how
I've got a
flounder are
clue.
doing?
No, sorry, Robin. I'm going to take that one away. And if you want to leave an email or ping me an email, I will look into it for you. I've got a bit of a general question for all of the panelists, which is, what are you most interested for in 2024? Emily.
Thanks, that's good. I wasn't sure whether that worked or not. I guess I'm interested in it, but I'm also concerned about it. I think obviously Matt touching on it with his with the Cornwall Good Seafood Guide earlier about pollock. I think we're going to see a lot of shifting effort over the next year. We're going to see a lot of people without income, and I think that means that they're going to be pushed into different fisheries in the southwest, particularly things like hake and crawfish, and I'm interested in how this pollock closure is going to affect all the other fisheries in the southwest. And I think management is done very singularly almost in the way that we look at species and we manage species. And actually the southwest is a really good example of how we could potentially manage fisheries a bit more holistically. We've got lots and lots of commercial species, lots of mixed fisheries, quite unique in that sense to other areas of the UK. So that's probably, yeah, I mean, other panelists may want to add to that, but I'm not sure, but that's kind of where my thoughts are at for the next year to 2 years to 5 years, even moving forwards. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm sure that's echoed by lots of us. Anyone else from the panel want to hop in before I pick on someone? Your own, I'm just wondering whether you kind of got any species in mind that you kind of seen a bit of a trend for, whether you're kind of like there's something that you're expecting to see next year, or wondering if these kind of big increases are going to hold.
Well, that's right. I didn't want to hug the small pelagic story, so I tried to restrain my input here. But yes, I think I mean, despite the relatively short time series, we've seen so many changes in the last 10 years, and you know, that includes the arrival of bluefin tuna that Emily talked about. Which one of the reasons may be the food, as she also indicated. So there's no doubt that both the warm water species that we're encountering are increasing. The general trend is increasing. There's a northwards migration. So yeah, there's no reason to believe that that's gonna stop. We had things like bonito in the survey since 2018 quite a bit, but that we haven't had any in the last couple of years. But that may well have something to do with the fact that we don't trawl quite as much as some of the guys who are out there obviously fishing commercially. So it's really hard to say what we're expecting, but there's no doubt that it looks like the warm water species are on the up and continuing to be so. And at some point, it's going to more negatively affect some of the colder water species. So spread is still around in good numbers. It's one of those sort of in between species that it's not entirely cold water. It's also not entirely warm water. It's looking okay from a biomass perspective, but there is a change in the ecology. So we're getting fewer larger fish, more smaller fish. So that has an impact on the fishery, as I briefly mentioned earlier. So to see where that goes, I mean, it meant that some of those fishes have had to divert to other target species. It's interesting. Every year is a surprise. We see something we don't expect. At some point, you know, at any level in the food web, whether it's the birds or or other top predators or some of the small pelagic. But I'm really keen. We're now getting a time series long enough to start to really statistically analyze some of those patterns, and that's yeah, we've started to do that. It's still quite challenging, but that's what my personal objective is going to be looking forward. So yeah, slightly selfish answer, but there we go.
Not at all. I think, yeah, absolutely fascinating. So just want to say one last thank you to all of our speakers who are increasingly giving up their time every year, which makes such a difference to be able to, you know, certainly I don't find this repetitive at all. I think it's really important to keep that annual kind of check on things. So thank you for giving your time so generously. Thank you for such brilliant and interesting talks, answering questions. And just a last plug for the Southwest Marine Ecosystems face-to-face meeting, the conference in Plymouth, which I think is the 26th of April, but Martin can correct me if I'm wrong. Hopefully see lots of you there. And also have a look at Southwest Marine Ecosystems website for all of the other webinars that are happening, because there's lots more to come. So thank you very much, everyone, and hopefully see you at the face-to-face.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.